I've always been fascinated by abandoned places. As a teenager, my group of friends and I spent nights exploring old buildings, forgotten houses, and disused factories. We weren't the only ones. A lot of people did it for adrenaline, but for us it was more than that. We enjoyed the feeling of stepping where no one else did, of feeling the history impregnated in the peeling walls. Among all the places we visited, there was one that always intrigued us. An old sanatorium that had been closed for more than 50 years. They said that the last patients had simply disappeared before the closure, and the government hushed up the story. This legend only made the place even more interesting for us. That night, we decided it was time to explore the sanatorium. The group was made up of me, Ethan, Logan, and Ryan. We took flashlights, a camera, and went there by bicycle. The building was on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by a dense forest that made it all the more sinister. When we arrived, the place was as imposing as I imagined. A decaying structure with broken windows and a silence that seemed to engulf everything around. We jumped over the fence without difficulty, and as soon as we stepped on the ground, we smelled the characteristic smell of mold and rotting wood. The air there felt different, heavy in a way that was hard to explain. The entrance hall was large, with the ceiling partially collapsed and faded medical posters on the walls. There were broken chairs strewn across the floor, and a reception desk that had seemed untouched for decades. The doors of some rooms were wide open, revealing old beds and moldy mattresses. Ryan filmed everything with the camera, commenting as if we were in a horror documentary. I just watched, trying to ignore the constant shiver on the back of my neck. It was strange how everything there seemed frozen in time, as if it was waiting for something or someone to come back. We walked through the dark corridors, dodging debris and furniture thrown at random. At a certain point, we found a large hall, probably an old dormitory. Iron beds were arranged in disorganized rows. Some turned on their sides, others rusted to the point of almost collapsing. There were overturned wheelchairs and a strong smell of humidity. At the back of the room, a large mirror occupied almost the entire wall. Unlike the rest of the room, it was intact, with no cracks or apparent dirt. He seemed out of place, as if he didn't belong there. "This is going to make for some sinister photos," Ethan said, raising his phone. We all agreed and started taking pictures of the mirror and the surrounding environment. The strange thing was that, even with the time of abandonment, the mirror reflected our image perfectly, without the slightest blurry. Ryan laughed, saying that it was probably the most valuable item in the sanatorium, and that someone should have stolen it earlier. We did some poses mocking the environment and moved on without giving much importance to it. At that moment, nothing seemed wrong, just an ordinary reflex, just an old mirror in an old building. We continued exploring the sanatorium for a few more minutes, capturing every detail with our cameras and cell phones. The corridors seemed endless, with doors that creaked at the slightest touch, and worn signs indicating sectors that no longer made sense. We found a room full of medical records scattered on the floor, some still legible, describing treatments that seemed outdated even for the time when the sanatorium closed. "This would make a great documentary," Logan commented, flipping through a yellowed card. We laughed at the idea, but deep down, we all felt that this place held too many secrets to be just legends. The silence inside was almost absolute, interrupted only by the sound of our footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. At one point, I heard a low noise as if something had moved inside one of the rooms. I froze for a moment, turning the flashlight to the side where the sound came from. The elongated shadows of the destroyed furniture danced on the walls, but there was nothing there. "Did you hear that?" I asked, but the others just shrugged. "Probably a rat," Ethan said, trying not to show nervousness. I decided to ignore it too, but an uncomfortable feeling stayed with me from then on. After a while, we decided that we already had enough material and decided to leave. The air inside the sanatorium was getting heavier and heavier, as if the structure itself rejected our presence there. We returned by the same path, dodging the wreckage and holding our breath whenever we smelled the strong smell of mold and rust. When we arrived at the exit, Logan suggested that we take one last group photo as a record of our expedition. He positioned the camera on a makeshift tripod and programmed the timer. We line up in front of the large mirror in the hall and smile. The flash lit up the room for a moment, and then we grabbed our things and quickly left, relieved to be outside again. The return home was smooth, and when we arrived at Ryan's house, we sat on the living room floor to review the photos and videos. We started laughing at some shaky images and the stupid comments we made during the shoot, but then Logan frowned. "Dude, what is that?" He enlarged one of the photos taken in the mirror, and silence took over the room. What we saw there didn't make sense. In the reflection, besides the four of us, there were other people, pale figures with old clothes and blank stares, positioned as if standing behind us. But the room was empty when we took the picture. I was sure of that. Discomfort took over everyone. We passed the images one by one, and in all that surrounded the mirror, those same figures were there. Some standing, others sitting on rusty beds, but always looking directly at the camera. "This has to be some kind of defect," Ethan said, trying to laugh, but his voice sounded nervous. Ryan squeezed his phone tightly, his eyes fixed on the screen as if he expected it to suddenly disappear. "If it was a defect, why does it only appear in the mirror? The rest of the photo is normal," I murmured, feeling a chill run down my back. We stood still for a few seconds, staring at the images as if trying to understand them would change what we were seeing. The atmosphere in the room, which was previously relaxed, became heavy as if something invisible was watching us. Logan fiddled with his phone non-stop, zooming in on the photos, trying to find some logical explanation. "Maybe it's an illusion caused by the light from the flash reflecting off something," he suggested, but no one seemed convinced. The more we looked, the more evident it became that those figures were indeed there, watching us as we took the pictures. Ryan, who had said nothing until then, suddenly stood up and began to pace. It can only be a defect of the camera," he said, but his tone of voice gave away that he did not believe in his own words. No one answered. My stomach was churning, a strange feeling washing over me, as if something was out of place. Then Ethan made a remark that chilled the room. "Did you notice that these don't people appear in any other part of the sanatorium, only in the mirror?" The idea was disturbing. It was as if they could only be seen there, in that reflection. Logan decided to test something. He took out his cell phone and opened the camera, pointing directly at the mirror in Ryan's living room. We all gathered around, our faces reflected on the screen. For a moment, everything seemed normal, but then right in the corner of the reflection, a vague shadow appeared, something that wasn't there in the room with us. Logan dropped his cell, phone on the floor, and cursed softly. "This can't be happening," murmured. My heart raced. I took the phone back, my hands sweating, and pointed it at the mirror again. This time there was nothing, only our scared faces and the room lit by the dim light of the lampshade. Fear began to give way to a suffocating paranoia. No one wanted to admit it out loud, but everyone was thinking the same thing. Did we bring something from the sanatorium? We tried to ignore it and move on, but it was impossible. Ryan was the first to say he needed to sleep. "We'll see that tomorrow." "We're tired, our minds may be playing tricks," he tried to argue, but his expression made it clear that he wanted to close the matter as soon as possible. We agreed, and each went home. But deep down, I knew that night would be long for all of us. When I got home, I locked the bedroom door and sat on the bed, still trying to process it all. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos once again, as if waiting for something to change. But the figures were there, gifts, watching. I turned off the screen and closed my eyes, but the image of those people did not leave my mind. That's when I felt something strange, a subtle but disturbing sensation, as if there was something in front of me besides the dark. My heart raced. I took a deep breath, tried to ignore it. But then, unintentionally, I looked into the mirror of my wardrobe. My body froze. The light from the lamp cast a faint glow on the surface of the mirror, enough to reflect my room clearly. But there was something wrong. My reflection was there, standing on the bed, just like me. However, I felt a strange discomfort, as if something was out of sync. I looked at myself, then at the reflection, trying to understand what bothered me. Then I realized my reflection seemed slightly late. It was barely noticeable. But as I blinked, I noticed that the reflection flashed a fraction of a second. Later, the air became heavy around me. My breath became short and a wave of panic rose through my chest. I stared into the mirror, hoping that my mind would prove me wrong, that it was just tiredness. But then something happened that made me lose my breath. My reflection moved my lips, but I didn't. He was smiling. A subtle, almost imperceptible smile that made my stomach turn. In a reflex of pure instinct, I threw a blanket over the mirror and walked away until I leaned against the wall on the other side of the room. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. What the hell was going on? I tried to rationalize. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me because of what we saw earlier. Maybe it was just a suggestion, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. That smile. This was not a trick of the light or a glitch in the reflection. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and tried to calm down. I wasn't going to take the blanket off the mirror. Not that night. Even so, sleeping was impossible. I turned from side to side, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection looking at me, smiling in that strange way. The room felt different, colder, quieter than usual. Every little crack of the wood or distant noise made my heart race. And then, in the middle of the night, I heard something that completely paralyzed me. A muffled sound coming from the other side of the room. It was low, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A faint murmur, something like a whisper. I held my breath and remained motionless, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But then the sound repeated, a little louder. My whole body shivered. The sound was coming from the cupboard, a mirror, and worst of all, he seemed to be laughing. My mind screamed for me to do nothing, to stay under the covers and ignore that sound, but my body was tense, motionless, unable to react. The muffled laughter continued, low, ragged, as if the thing on the other side was having fun with my fear. The blanket that covered the mirror moved slightly, as if something had touched him from the inside. I could feel the sweat running down, the back of my neck, every muscle in my body begging me not to look. But then, as if an invisible force forced me, I moved. Slowly, I pulled the covers off my body and put my feet on the floor. The wood was cold, as if the room had lost all its heat. A shiver ran down my spine, and the urge to run dominated my mind. But I needed to see it. I needed to make sure that this was nothing more than a delirium caused by fear. With slow steps, I approached the mirror. The laughter had ceased, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I reached out my trembling hand and, in one swift motion, ripped off the blanket. The mirror was there, intact, reflecting my room as always. My own reflection looked normal, staring at me with wide, tired eyes. I sighed heavily, feeling momentary relief. Maybe I really was paranoid, but as I turned to go back to bed, something in the mirror caught my attention. My heart raced when I realized that my reflection was still, watching me even after I had already turned around. I froze in place, unable to process what I was seeing. With a lump in my throat, I forced myself to look back into the mirror. And that's where he moved. Slowly, very slowly, my reflection tilted my head to the side, analyzing my reaction. My knees gave way, and I staggered backwards, almost stumbling. That was no longer a simple reflex. He was watching me in a way that no image in the mirror should be able to do. The smile returned, bigger this time, the lips stretching in a way that seemed wrong, like he's glad I'd finally noticed him. An intense cold ran down my spine and my breathing became shallow. Every instinct in my body screamed for me to get out of there, but I couldn't move. My eyes were caught on that distorted reflection, that smile that seemed to extend beyond the confines of the face. Then, in a slow, calculated motion, my reflection raised my hand and waved at me. The gesture was slow, almost mocking, as if it was testing my reaction. My body finally reacted, and I tripped backwards, crashing against the wall. My eyes blinked fast, trying to find some logic to what was happening. But there wasn't. That was not possible. I wanted to scream, run, destroy that mirror, but something held me there. The reflection now tilted its head to the other side, its eyes fixed on me with a morbid interest. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was on the verge of collapse. I needed to get out of that room. On an impulse, I turned to the door and ran, not caring about anything else. But as soon as my hand touched the doorknob, I heard a sound that froze me in place. A dry crack, like glass being scratched from the inside. Slowly, against all my will, I looked back. The mirror was now covered by a thin crack that spread across the glass like a web. But that wasn't what made me lose my breath. It was the reflection. He was no longer standing still. He was coming, towards me. The empty eyes fixed on me, the now grotesque smile a blur of teeth and lips stretched in an inhuman way. The glass cracked with every step he took inside that distorted space. I didn't wait to see what would happen. With a desperate tug, I opened the door and ran out into the hallway, slamming the door behind me with all the force I could. My chest rose and fell, sweat running down my face. Behind the door, absolute silence. But I knew that if I opened that door again, the mirror would be there intact, as if nothing had happened, like he's just waiting for me to come back. After running out of the room, I went straight to my younger brother's room. He slept peacefully, oblivious to what I had just been through. I curled up on the extra mattress that was next to his bed and stood there motionless, staring at the ceiling. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the reflection smiling at me, the crack spreading through the glass, the dry sound of something about to break. Time dragged by until the sun began to illuminate the cracks in the window. When morning came, I pretended that nothing had happened. I didn't tell my parents anything. I took out my phone and sent a message to my friends group, asking if everything was okay and if anyone had noticed anything strange during the night. One by one, they answered no, that everything was normal. And then, one of them said something that made me freeze. The photos were clean now. There was nothing else in them, no strange figure, no reflection that shouldn't be there. I think it was just our own tiredness, someone commented, but I knew it wasn't. I spent the day trying to distract myself, forcing myself to go about my routine as if nothing had happened. I went to school, did my homework, played video games, anything to keep my mind busy. But one thing was certain, I avoided entering my room as much as possible. The mere thought of looking at that mirror again made me nauseous. When night fell, I had no choice. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and froze. The mirror was no longer on the wall. It was on the floor, broken into dozens of pieces scattered across the carpet. My mother came to see what had happened and helped me pick up the pieces. As we threw the pieces into a bag, she commented that this sometimes happened with old mirrors, which probably the support did not hold, and he fell by himself. "Tomorrow we'll buy you another one," she said without giving it much importance. But I hurried to answer that I didn't need to, that I didn't want a mirror in the room anymore. She looked at me a little strange, but didn't insist. I just wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Time passed and I never touched the subject again. My friends went on with their lives and so did I. We grew up. Each one took a different path, and that episode was buried in the past. But even after all these years, I still wonder what it was all about. I never came to understand what really happened that night, or what it meant. I just know that to this day, I can't stare at a mirror for long without feeling a shiver going up the back of my neck. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel.